was a bee.
I wanted to dedicate this piece to all my fellow queer writers out there, especially for writers of color. I'm so proud of you. You're beautiful human beings, and your voices deserve to be heard. Okay, this is In Memory of You by me, Darby McBride. It was noon, and Alice Turner wasn't in the office yet. This was strange for 3 reasons. 1, Alice was punctual and never showed up later than a couple of minutes to work. 2, today, representatives from the new upstart biological artificial intelligence company, Bicorp, were stopping by, and this was an important, potentially groundbreaking partnership for Turner Replacement Parts Incorporated. 3, Alice Turner and Samantha Collins scheduled a date to go fuck at a nearby Love Hotel after work, planned in advance nearly 3 weeks prior while Alice traveled on a surprise business trip. This last reason had Samantha, assistant director at TRP, Turner Replacement Parts, we can grow you anything, drumming her thoroughly chewed fingernails in unmeasured staccato beats against the synthetic wood grain of her desk. She glanced obsessively at the time. 12:03 hovered, immersed in a crimson halo in the corner of her optical interface, blinking invariably. The mocking numbers dangled silently, an aggressive red hornet attracted to her slow-burning panic. Sam leaned back in her hover chair and glanced out the windows spanning the north side of her office. Outside, professionals rushed through the massive bridges extending across the city skyline, presumably looking for a quick lunch at one of the large city centers that connected to individual skyscrapers via the enclosed overpasses. Tightly regulated vehicle traffic controlled by AI technology flew in a coordinated swarm, weaving through sky bridges and the towering trunks of buildings. Samantha idly wondered if Alice lounged in the back of one of the more expensive vehicles, which parted the overwhelming traffic with ease. The purple of an incoming call pulsed around the edges of her vision, and she answered quickly without checking the caller ID. She tried to retain a neutral expression when her secretary's face appeared in a blue holograph above her desk. John's circular visage, already panicked, mixed with confusion, and Samantha knew she had failed to keep bitter-tasting disappointment from crossing her eyes. Yes, John? Representatives from Bicorp are here. I've sent them to conference room 3, he squeaked. Mr. and Mrs. Turner have not yet arrived. They were scheduled to be here 3 hours ago. I'll be right there. Samantha pushed back from her desk. Her floating chair, suddenly lost without her solidity, spun and bobbed as if set adrift. She rushed down the hall, heels clicking purposefully against the faux marble floor in the hallway. Internally, she cursed. Of course, Tristan Turner, CEO, couldn't make it to what could be one of the most important meetings of the quarter, maybe even the year. Instead, he gallivanted with celebrities, spending company funds. His goal on those work trips was to entice wealthy individuals into buying test tube livers and kidneys so they can enjoy their coke-addled lives to the fullest. Samantha had convinced herself that her animosity towards Tristan stemmed from his selfishness and his unwillingness to take his work seriously, not that he had had the privilege of spending his life married to Alice. She rounded the corner, and despite her small stature, co-workers stepped hastily aside as she half ran, half stomped to conference room 3. She felt relieved that John had had the good sense to book conference room 3. It stood as the only room with the technology that linked to the optical interface of select TRP higher-ranking employees. This allowed them to use the security cameras floating around the room to zoom in on faces, hands, or anything else that might give away the thoughts of their clients. She skidded to a halt at the door to the conference room and felt a rush of warm surprise, seeing Alice introducing herself to the 3 representatives for Bicorp. Sunlight streamed in from the sparkling dual-screen windows, setting her pale skin in a soft golden hue. Several months ago, Samantha had run her fingers over Alice's soft, freckled shoulders after work one day in the same conference room they were in now. At the time, thick storm clouds had blanketed the sky, so they had set the artificial window screens to a spattering of stars. Cradled in the memory, she was shaken back into the present by the sight of Tristan Turner standing tall next to his wife. He smiled far too wide to be genuine. Samantha paused at the door to conference room 3, smoothing the wrinkles out of her ruffled gray skirt. She picked off a piece of lint and flicked the offending cotton away as she strode purposefully into the room. Alice looked up, and in that motion, Samantha's heart clenched, and she felt heat flood her cheeks in a wave of pink. Alice always managed to bring a blush to the other woman's face. You must be Sam. A heavy-set man reached a pudgy hand towards her. His accent had a rich, spicy undertone. It reminded her of a dish of Kenyan pilau she had eaten during an internship in college, brought fresh from a Nairobi market stall. Kenya was a growing hotspot for innovative technology in both biology and spaceflight. It was clear to Samantha that Dr. Otiano, whose name, pronouns, and company appeared against his chest in her optical screen, was one of the many scientists who were being produced in the country. His two companions, Mrs. Najiri and Dr. Shaw, stepped forward to also politely greet Samantha. Ms. Najiri was a tall woman with thick braids pulled into a bun. Dr. Shaw was gender ambiguous, wearing a yellow and blue kanja wrapped around their head. In between introductions, Sam cast furtive glances toward Alice, trying to catch her blue gaze, but the woman seemed enthralled in a conversation with Tristan. Samantha's lips pressed into a thin line of annoyance. Tristan stood at the end of the long table at the center of the room. Hollow screens hovered in front of all the chairs. He gestured broadly with one large hand, and the table folded to a size appropriate for 6 people. His expensive wristwatch, which was Bluetooth connected to all the technology in the building, flashed in the light coming in from the windows. Everyone sat, and Samantha was disappointed that Alice abruptly positioned herself next to Tristan. That was unusual. She generally always sat next to Samantha during meetings. This was typically only to caress the other woman's foot from under the table. Alice glanced toward Samantha, and Samantha smiled back broadly. Her stomach twisted in dread when all that Alice returned was a distant smile and nod. Is Alice mad at me, she thought? Throughout the meeting, Samantha tried to catch Alice's attention to gauge what was wrong, but Alice was wrapped with the representatives and Tristan, devoted complete awareness to both. Samantha used her optical implants to zoom in on Alice's distant face, the eyeliner smeared unevenly around her eyes, her hand as it squeezed Tristan's affectionately. As you know, Dr. Shaw was saying, we have discovered ways to create an artificial mind and personality based off of memory downloads. Their dark eyes were on Tristan and Alice. We have had the memory download technology for a while now, piped in Dr. Otiano, his round, friendly face split in a grin. Samantha noted Tristan's serious expression and the thin line that deepened into a crevice between his brows. Mrs. Collins. It took Samantha several moments to realize that Alice was speaking to her. She looked expectantly at Samantha as she fumbled with her screen, embarrassed. Mrs. Collins, she calls me Sam, even at work. Can you check in with our fetal and body cloning department and see if they have time to show our guests through the lab? They could probably make it to California from New York in... She paused as her eyes flitted over information on her optical screen. 30 minutes by atmosphere if the light air traffic keeps up. Maybe schedule it after 3. They can take the company shuttle. She didn't wait to see if Samantha confirmed before turning back to Tristan. All 3 visiting employees from Bicorp watched Alice intently, but Samantha could only stare at her hollow screen, trying to keep the sharp sting of tears from her eyes. Something was wrong with Alice Turner. Samantha doesn't bring up the scheduled date, and Alice doesn't ask. She's left sexually frustrated that night, switching between half-heartedly watching VR porn and religiously combing through emails that Alice sent her throughout her trip. She scrolled down the list, trying to spot a crossroads between past Alice and present Alice. The emails had stopped for an impossible stretch of a week. Was this when Tristan rendezvoused with Alice? Checking back to correspondence between the two, the date of the email confirmed that this was when they met in Argentina. Samantha suspected with a feverish certainty that Tristan had something to do with this unexplainable change. She listed out the reasons why and how Tristan could have caused this worrying shift in Alice Turner. Had he figured out about the affair? Samantha doubted this. He would have confronted her about it, or at the very least fired her. She crossed cheating off the list above her on her bed. The shrill scream of a siren blaring outside made her pause, and she waved her hand to activate the noise-canceling system on her windows. Located under cheating, an itching accusation burned in Samantha's eyes. He's beating her. Samantha never saw any sign of Tristan physically harming his wife, nor had she seen any evidence of his hand on Alice's porcelain skin. Would Alice have told her if Tristan touched her with the intent to injure her? Samantha wasn't sure. In early January, several months before, they were enjoying wine made from a strain of fast-fermenting grapes that TRP had produced for a vineyard in France. The wine tasted mediocre, but the conversation made up for the lackluster alcohol. Dizzy and giggling, Alice paused the conversation to rant about another fight she'd had with Tristan the night before. We were screaming at each other. I thought he might hit me because of some of the things I said to him. She moved her arm in a non-committal gesture, and wine leapt from the cup, splashing in a blood-like crimson puddle on the table. Samantha, somewhat sobered by this, asked, He didn't, did he? Oh, no, he would never do something like that. Alice was reduced again to laughing, her cheeks rosy from wine. Samantha wanted to convince Alice to come live with her then, but even in her wine-induced haze, she knew better than to suggest that Alice leave Tristan. The two were inseparable, at least in the business sense. Alice's true love was TRP. The next week at work, Samantha used any subtle excuse she could to talk to Alice, but even when by themselves, Alice acted only respectfully professional towards Sam. There were no physical signs of damage towards Alice. She did look somewhat skinnier, a shade paler than normal. Are you eating enough? It was lunch and Samantha brought Alice coffee. She was nibbling at a salad at her desk. Alice looked confused, almost affronted at the question. Excuse me? Sorry, you just haven't been eating as much these past couple days. I wanted to make sure you aren't sick, is all. Of course I'm not sick. This is what I always eat. Besides, your talents as my assistant director should be used for something other than monitoring my eating habits, yes? She smiled politely and took the cup of coffee, bobbing her head in thanks. Well, maybe do you want to get a drink later today? I just picked up a vintage 2085 Pinot Noir. I don't drink wine. Thanks, though. She nodded her. In a daze, Samantha turned and headed for the door. Mrs. Collins, one more thing. Her heart raced as she glanced back at Alice. Thank you for the coffee. Next time, could you put sugar in it, though? Samantha had been bringing coffee to Alice for 5 years. Never had she asked for sugar. Of course, I'll make sure to remember that. On Friday, Tristan and Alice went to the genetics conference in London. Samantha declined an invitation from her coworkers to go out to drinks at City Center No. 5, Lincoln Square. Instead, she waited at her desk until the door clicked shut behind the last person to leave the building. She used her admin privileges to access the AI monitoring system, tricking it into thinking that she was still in her office. She also forced it to ignore the CEO's own office right down the hall entirely. After confirming that everyone was out of the building, she crept across the shadowed office floor until she sat in front of Tristan's holographic desk interface, staring apprehensively at the glowing screen. As she sat in his hover chair, her mind was a battleground of conflicting thoughts. She debated the morality of checking her boss's private email. However, after a quick self-deliberation, she felt that Alice's fate may be on the line, not to mention her own illicit relationship with the beautiful woman. She opened his email application. She had his key phrase to get onto his personal computer memorized, though it was given to her for professional reasons that didn't involve spying. The first thing she noticed as she browsed across his private messages was that there was a shockingly disproportionate amount of communication from Bicorp. And this wasn't all with the CEOs. That would have been expected due to the impending partnership between the two companies. No, what surprised Sam was the fact that half of them were from Dr. Shaw, the individual who had come to visit TRP with the other representatives from Bicorp. How is she doing? Updated upload, behavioral challenges, expected outcomes, all caught her attention as her brown eyes flitted over the screen. She took an image capture of the screen using her optical lens to go over later. What the fuck is Tristan up to? She whispered under her breath. Her finger hung over a message entitled, Changes Needed, ready to look over the email, when she heard the door to the floor slide open and two people talking in soft, bubbly tones. The lights suddenly turned on, and Samantha flinched from the blinding clarity of her situation, as Tristan Turner used his Bluetooth watch to awaken the entire office. In one quick inhale of breath, Samantha scrambled away from Tristan's desk in a haze of fear. In the second breath, she made a beeline for his door and was out of the office. Her head pulsed from the fluttering beat of her chest. She scrambled from his side of the workplace and down the hall toward her own desk. She encountered Tristan and Alice halfway there, rosy with alcohol. They were clinging to each other in a way that didn't leave much up to the imagination about what their current plans were. Jealousy cut through the thumping panic, a hot knife stinging her ribs. Alice looked embarrassed. Oh, hi, Samantha, she squeaked, her voice ringing high. She held her sweater protectively around her chest where her dress was hanging. It had been physically pulled low and askew. She was so self-conscious that she didn't seem to question why Samantha was still in the office or why she wasn't at her own desk. Tristan, however, narrowed his eyes. Suspicion was written plainly on his face, even through his tipsy haze. Yes, hi, Samantha. He reached toward Alice and wrapped his arm possessively around her waist, pulling her close. And then he was smiling, straight teeth, a foreboding bleached white. Samantha smiled back weakly. I was just leaving. Are you sure you don't want to stay with us and have a drink? Tristan asked pointedly. Alice shook her head and playfully hit Tristan on the arm. Let her go home, she said, giggling. Samantha, not wanting to hear anything else, pushed past them. I'll leave you two alone to your date night. I was going to meet up with friends anyways. Just got caught up in work. You know how it is. As she hurried toward her office to grab her things, she heard Alice call after her. That's why we love you, having you here, Samantha. You're such a dedicated employee. She could almost feel Tristan's eyes boring into the back of her head, as if he could see the guilt written in her disheveled hair. The next day, as Samantha was bringing Alice coffee with sugar, She walked in to her boss, chatting on the phone with her husband. When Samantha entered the room, she ended the call and motioned towards the chair at the front of her desk, imploring Sam to sit. After awkwardly seating herself, Alice smiled warmly at Sam and said, "Would you like to come over for dinner tonight?" Samantha paused, unsure if she heard right. "Really?" "Yes, of course. I just got off the phone with Tristan, and we would love to have you over." Suspicion pricked at Samantha's skin. "So Tristan invited me?" "Well, it was my idea, but he agreed wholeheartedly." Samantha thought momentarily about this, weighing the pros and cons. "It would be tonight, but we could reschedule it for another time if you're busy." "I'll go," she said impulsively. She decided that this opportunity would be a good way to figure out what had happened between Tristan and Alice. "Oh, good. I'm so glad. We will see you around 7. Does that work?" That night, when packing up wine and some cheese she had been saving, Samantha paused and picked up a steak knife that was sitting in her dish rack. She held it gently in her palm. The steel glinted off the overhead light of the kitchen. In a decision that she didn't fully comprehend, she wrapped the knife in a stained dish towel and hid it in the pocket of her purse. After tucking the cheese and wine over the knife, she headed outside to call a car. The Turners lived in one of only 5 hover mansions in New York City. The islands floated slowly over Long Island and the Bay. There was no way to reach them except for a hover vehicle. Samantha had been to their house before, but as the car flew towards the island, she was blown away yet again by the wealth the two possessed. The setting sun cast a lavender glow over the city below. She landed on the hover pad and walked through the extensive gardens to the front door. She glanced back over the grounds. Unnatural plants made in TRP labs dappled the expansive front lawn with blues, reds, and yellows in a cacophony of bright colors. The house was high enough that mist pillowed lightly around the top windows. Samantha was struck by the feeling that she was stepping away from her world and into something out of a fairy tale. Tristan greeted her at the door. I'm almost done, I'm sorry. Tristan greeted her at the door with his customary fake grin. Samantha forced a smile in return. He led her through the parlor, and she noticed with some unease that the unusual bustle of hired staff was absent this night. They ended up in the library, where a non-synthetic fire with wood burned in the fireplace, a rarity since the laws combating climate change were enacted decades earlier. The fire cast sinister shadows dancing across the room. I brought wine, Samantha said, gingerly withdrawing the bottle of dark red liquid from her purse. Ah, good. Shall I pour a glass for us? She nodded and handed him the bottle. He opened it with a loud pop and sent the cork flying, and Sam jumped. He took out 2 glasses and poured, handing her one. There was no glass for Alice. Where's Alice? She asked cautiously. Tristan swirled the wine in his glass, looking at his expansive bookshelves. He stayed silent for unending seconds and didn't look Sam in the eyes until he said, Alice isn't here. His tone was flat, and Sam felt her eyes blur with the sudden onset of dread. You're a sharp one. I imagine you've noticed something different about her, yes? Sam didn't answer, only gripped the edges of her purse with white knuckles, poised to go for the knife that was hidden in the depths. I know you were going through my computer. I didn't do that, Samantha said in a clipped tone. Yes, you did, but I won't hold it against you because I need your help. What? Why? Samantha was suddenly confused. Her grip on her purse loosened. Because the Alice you knew is dead. The one that has been around for the past few weeks is a clone downloaded with all of my memories and perceptions of her into an AI personality. Anger drove out the fear and confusion like a wave slamming up against her. She whipped the knife out of her purse and held it aloft, preparing to lunge at Tristan. You fucking bastard, you killed her, didn't you? Now it was Tristan's turn to look both confused and somewhat afraid. He took a step back. What? No, I didn't kill Alice. She was murdered in Argentina by some cokehead she was sleeping with. He had a bad trip, and I had to go retrieve her body. His voice cracked in genuine heartbreak. He looked up at Samantha, and his carefully controlled face melted into a pained expression. She was sleeping with someone else? At that thought, Samantha deflated. Her own feelings of love toward Alice crackled painfully with the prick of betrayal. The knife dropped from her hand. She stumbled backwards and fell into a plush chair. Tristan brought the glass of wine he had poured for Sam, and she accepted it gratefully, downing it in a few heavy gulps. You were in love with Alice. It wasn't a question from Tristan, it was a statement. I had a feeling that you two were sleeping together, but I respected Alice's privacy on the matter. We had an agreement, and I didn't want to lose her. I loved her too much. He fell into the chair beside her, and they sat in silence as the fire crackled in front of them. The flickering light reflected bright against the tired tears that streamed down Sam's face. You wanted a favor? Her voice was rough and with spent emotion. The new Alice is the first of her kind, an experiment between both Bicorp and TRP. I want your memories, for the new Alice. You two were close. Why should I give them to you, so you can have a robot version of your old wife? No thanks. We could have her back. She's not the same with just my memories. Samantha, this could be the big innovation of the century. He paused to take another swig of his wine. People could have their loved ones back. We could have Alice back. Samantha stayed silent. Visions of Alice flashed through her mind, her soft giggle, the sound of sheets sliding over her skin, a glimpse of the slight gap between her front teeth when she smiled. The memories were tinted blue now. Alice had portrayed Samantha. She had been sleeping with other people this whole time. The irony of the situation caused a bark of grim laughter to erupt from Sam. Tristan glanced pensively at the English woman sitting next to him. So what do you say? Things could be different with the new Alice. They could start over. Sam rolled her eyes toward the ceiling. She noticed a blemish that had been covered up with plaster and chose to focus on it. It was slightly lighter than the rest of the ceiling surrounding it. The door opened from across the house, and new Alice's voice rang through the halls. Hello, I'm home.